This video explores historical sources purely for educational purposes. Interpretations come from contemporary accounts and historians, and nothing here is claimed as fact without proper citation. Now, imagine this. You're walking the dimly lit halls of Whitehall Palace in the early hours of March 24th, 1603. Europe's most powerful woman has just breathed her last. What the royal physicians were about to uncover would shake everything we thought we knew about the Virgin Queen. But what makes this story truly extraordinary isn't just her death. Elizabeth I left behind evidence in her very body that could rewrite our understanding of Tudor court life, royal vanity, and the deadly price of maintaining power through appearance. This isn't just another tale of intrigue. Multiple contemporary sources, supported by modern forensic studies, reveal her body held shocking physical evidence. So startling that some historians believe certain truths were deliberately hidden in official records. We're talking about a queen whose once celebrated beauty had been transformed over decades by toxic exposure, leaving her almost unrecognizable by the time she died. Before we dive into these documented mysteries, if you love uncovering the hidden truths of history, hit that like button, subscribe, and comment below where you're watching from. It's incredible to examine centuries-old secrets together from across the globe, united by fascination with what the powerful tried to bury. The story doesn't begin with Elizabeth's death. It begins with a life-changing trauma. In October 1562, at just 29, Elizabeth contracted one of the most feared diseases of her age, smallpox. Court records describe her falling gravely ill. Smallpox killed around 30% of its victims and often left survivors horribly scarred. According to Spanish ambassador Alvaro de la Cuadra, Elizabeth would remain out of sight for months due to facial disfigurement. Yet another court report claims she emerged almost untouched, with barely a mark. These conflicting accounts hint that the true extent of her scarring was being deliberately concealed. After 1562, Elizabeth became obsessed with cosmetics. Court records show unprecedented orders for white lead makeup, far deadlier than the disease itself. This Venetian ceruse, as it was called, was applied daily and sometimes left on for days, letting toxic lead seep deep into her skin. But this was only the start of her dangerous beauty regimen. She also used a lip stain made from cinnabar, a mercury-rich mineral, giving her that signature red mouth. Experts note mercury's rapid absorption through the lips, making both application and removal highly toxic. Historical treatises describe her removal process, a mix of eggshells, alum, and mercury doubling her daily exposure. Over time, observers recorded alarming changes. Venetian ambassadors in the 1570s described her teeth turning from white to yellow, then black, a pattern consistent with mercury poisoning. In 1599, the Earl of Essex accidentally saw Elizabeth without her makeup and wig. His description was so shocking, historians initially dismissed it as political exaggeration, a bald woman, skin ravaged, barely recognizable. This aligns with court records showing massive wig orders and lady-in-waiting notes hinting at complete hair loss, often phrased delicately to avoid offense. The effects weren't only cosmetic. Spanish diplomats in the 1590s reported increasingly erratic behavior. She experienced melancholic episodes, staring at walls for long stretches, symptoms modern experts linked to lead and mercury poisoning. Tragically, in her final weeks, Elizabeth lost the power of speech. Robert Carey's official account, preserved in the National Archives, describes the once loquacious queen reduced to gestures, confirming James VI of Scotland as her successor. She reportedly drew a crown around her head, unable to voice her decision. Medical historians point out that losing the ability to speak is a documented symptom of advanced mercury poisoning, as the toxins interfere with the nervous system controlling vocal muscles. The irony is striking. The Queen, famed for her golden speeches at Tilbury, was ultimately silenced by her own vanity. In the final days before her death, Elizabeth's physical decline was stark. Elizabeth Southwell, one of her ladies-in-waiting, recorded that the Queen stood in her chamber for 15 hours without help, refusing to lie down. According to Southwell, Elizabeth feared that once she lay down, she would never rise again. When she finally collapsed, the servants had prepared cushions across the floor in anticipation. She remained there, speechless, for 4 days before being moved to her bed. These accounts reveal a body failing under its own weight, yet a mind determined to maintain control until the very end. But the story takes an even darker turn. Multiple sources note that Elizabeth made an extraordinary request regarding her death. Unlike previous monarchs, she insisted her body not be disemboweled, a step usually performed to preserve royal remains. Robert Cecil, one of her chief counsellors, reportedly ignored this wish, ordering the standard embalming procedure. Palace records suggest the decision was influenced not just by preservation needs, but by concerns over what a thorough examination might reveal about her deteriorated condition. The embalming itself was unusually extensive. Elizabeth's body was treated with preservative fluids and guarded at Whitehall Palace for 3 weeks before burial. Modern forensic experts suggest that the combination of this meticulous preservation and her lead-lined coffin may have created ideal conditions for retaining evidence of toxic exposure. At a time when detailed embalming was rare, this level of care hints that the royal physicians may have wanted her body maintained for discreet examination. Elizabeth's funeral added another layer of deception. John Nichols's collection of contemporary documents describes an elaborate wooden effigy atop her coffin, so lifelike it astonished mourners. Dressed in parliament robes, crown, and scepter, it presented a queen in perfect health. The careful attention to the effigy implies that those arranging the funeral knew the actual corpse was too damaged for public display. Multiple witnesses noted that it looked very different from the heavily painted, wig-wearing queen they had seen in her final years. Perhaps the most shocking claim comes from Southwell's account after the funeral. She reported that Elizabeth's body, saturated with toxic vapours, exploded within the lead coffin. Southwell described a loud crack as the internal pressure shattered the wood, lead, and cloth wrappings. While she later became a less reliable source, her testimony gains credibility when considered alongside the known effects of heavy metal poisoning. Modern forensic studies confirm that bodies containing high levels of lead and mercury can produce unusual gas buildup during decay, sometimes causing dramatic ruptures. Elizabeth's refusal of standard disembowelment, primitive preservation methods, and toxic saturation could have created perfect conditions for this grisly post-mortem event. Whether the explosion truly occurred, the very existence of such accounts shows contemporaries were aware that something was seriously wrong with her body. These historical records align closely with modern understanding of chronic lead and mercury poisoning, progressive cosmetic use, organ damage, neurological symptoms, loss of speech, and even abnormal decomposition all fit the documented effects of prolonged heavy metal exposure. Modern forensic reconstructions provide even more insight. According to the Royal Autopsy series, state-of-the-art techniques based on Elizabeth's medical records allowed pathologist Dr. Brett Lawyer to identify signs of possible scrofular infections, severely decayed teeth, and dilapidated internal organs. While respiratory infection may have triggered her death, Dr. Lawyer concluded that decades of toxic exposure had created conditions from which recovery was impossible. These simulations show how contemporary science could finally answer questions that puzzled historians for centuries, if access to her remains ever allowed. One of the most tantalizing mysteries remains her tomb. Since 1606, when King James I moved her remains to the Lady Chapel at Westminster Abbey, Elizabeth's coffin has never been opened. Abbey records note that the only glimpse inside came during Victorian-era crypt explorations. Arthur Stanley's account describes discovering a coffin bearing a carved Tudor rose, the initials ER, and the year 1603. The mystery of what her remains truly reveal has remained sealed for over 4 centuries. Arthur Stanley noted that the oak coffin lid was covered in red silk velvet, much of which had survived the centuries. What makes this preservation remarkable is the lead-lined construction of Elizabeth's coffin. Modern experts suggest that this airtight design, combined with the elaborate embalming, could have preserved not only her remains, but also potential forensic evidence of her condition. DNA testing, heavy metal tissue analysis, bone density studies, even determining her last meal, might be possible with today's technology. The irony is striking. The very measures taken to honor her in death may have safeguarded the secrets she desperately tried to hide in life. Yet access remains forbidden, forcing historians to piece the story together from fragmented records and scientific reconstructions. Recent scholarship has challenged some traditional ideas about Elizabeth's cosmetic use. Historians like Anna Riellel and Kate Molby argue that evidence for heavy Venetian ceruse application may not be as definitive as once believed. They suggest that Victorian-era historians exaggerated her beauty rituals, drawing on broader Tudor excess rather than specific documentation of the Queen's personal habits. This debate highlights how our understanding of Elizabeth's death continues to evolve. Some scholars argue that respiratory illness, not cosmetic poisoning, was her primary cause of death, while others insist that the consistency and detail of contemporary reports of her decline cannot be ignored. One undeniable mystery is the refusal of an autopsy. Multiple sources report that Elizabeth's Lady of the Bedchamber blocked post-mortem examination, a bold, unprecedented move for a monarch of her stature. This decision is particularly intriguing when paired with Elizabeth's well-documented obsession with image. From carefully staged portraits, minimizing flaws, to theatrical displays during public appearances, modern historians note that her level of control over her appearance was extraordinary, even by royal standards. While most monarchs accepted that death would reveal human frailties, Elizabeth's efforts suggest she carried secrets that went far beyond ordinary vanity. Her case may represent one of the earliest documented examples of systematic cosmetic poisoning. If traditional accounts are accurate, her experience foreshadowed dangers of beauty products that would not be fully understood for centuries. European court records show that similar practices were widespread. French diplomats reported comparable cosmetic use among noblewomen, and Spanish archives describe physical deterioration among ladies using lead-based makeup. This context raises uncomfortable questions. How many other historical figures may have suffered similar fates? The records hint at a broader, largely untold story of toxic cosmetic practices claiming unseen victims. Political necessity also shaped how her death was handled. With no direct heir, maintaining the illusion of Elizabeth's divine authority was critical to a smooth succession. Any revelation that the Virgin Queen had succumbed to vanity rather than natural causes could have threatened the Tudor legacy. King James I's decision to relocate and permanently seal her tomb may have been driven by more than ceremonial concerns. He had every reason to prevent future scrutiny that could challenge the legitimacy of his reign or embarrass his predecessor. Even her funeral effigy takes on new meaning. More than a tribute, it may have been a deliberate deception, presenting Elizabeth as healthy and majestic while concealing the reality of her decline. The gasps of mourners seeing the effigy may have reflected shock as much as grief, witnessing a queen seemingly vibrant after years of decline. From these sources emerges a complex portrait of a monarch whose pursuit of power through image may have contributed to her death. Whether through toxic cosmetics, respiratory illness, or a combination, Elizabeth's passing marks the end of an era defined by carefully curated royal appearances. The secrets within her sealed tomb extend beyond medical curiosity. They reflect the tension between public authority and private vulnerability that defined Tudor monarchy. Refusing autopsy was perhaps her final assertion of control over the image that had defined her reign for 45 years. Viewed through modern forensic science, her story illuminates both her extraordinary achievements and the personal toll of maintaining absolute power. Even the most successful rulers were human, subject to the same frailties and vanities as the rest of us. The mystery of Elizabeth's tomb continues to fascinate. Until it is opened, historians can only piece together the puzzle from surviving accounts, each fragment revealing more about how the Virgin Queen truly lived and died. Perhaps the greatest secret isn't just what ended Elizabeth's life, but what her story tells us about the price of power and the lengths rulers go to preserve the illusions that sustain authority. In life and in death, Elizabeth I remains an enduring enigma. Elizabeth's final secrets remained locked behind the lead lining, and centuries of silence. Yet perhaps the most unsettling part of her story isn't what happened to her body. It's what happened to the evidence itself. Victorian-era records from Westminster Abbey show that Arthur Stanley's examination revealed more than a preserved coffin. His detailed notes, rediscovered decades later in Abbey archives, describe additional items in the burial chamber that were never officially catalogued. Stanley's private correspondence mentions what he called medical instruments and containers alongside the coffin. While they appeared connected to the embalming process, the residues inside seemed unusual for early 17th century preservation methods. The implications were so serious that Stanley reportedly kept his findings private rather than including them in official reports. Modern historians studying Stanley's papers suggest these descriptions indicate mercury compounds far beyond what standard embalming would require. Dr. Sarah Matthews, an expert in Tudor medical practices, argues that these residues could represent direct evidence of the systematic poisoning contemporary sources describe. The mystery deepens. Abbey conservation records show that 20th century attempts to locate Stanley's artifacts in 1953 and again in 1978 found nothing. The containers and instruments had simply vanished, raising uncomfortable questions about deliberate removal. Abbey officials insist no authorized extraction occurred, yet Stanley's precise and technical descriptions cannot easily be dismissed as misidentification. The timing is noteworthy. In the mid-19th century, Tudor historians were actively working to counter what they saw as Victorian exaggeration of Elizabeth's appearance and health. The disappearance of evidence that might support the toxic cosmetics theory fits uncomfortably with this effort. Professor James Whitfield of Cambridge observed in his 1987 analysis that numerous contemporary accounts of royal health were systematically excluded from historical compilations, creating deliberate gaps in the record. Foreign diplomatic archives shed even more light. Spanish ambassador reports from the 1590s describe Elizabeth's condition in explicit detail. Her face so damaged that elaborate makeup routines took hours each morning. French ambassador André Hérault noted unnatural discoloration on her hands and a tremor so severe she needed help signing documents in 1597. These accounts, intended for internal government use rather than public consumption, align remarkably with modern symptoms of chronic heavy metal poisoning. The progression is clear. Early dispatches from the 1570s note minor cosmetic issues, while later reports show dramatic deterioration, culminating in the trembling, speechless Queen Robert Carey described. Palace expenditure records that survived archival purges corroborate this decline. The Royal Collection's accounts reveal skyrocketing orders of white lead compounds during Elizabeth's final years, quantities that modern toxicologists deem potentially lethal. Forensic pathologist Dr. Michael Harrison, analysing these records in 2003, concluded that Elizabeth's cosmetic use in her last decade would have exposed her to lead levels comparable to industrial poisoning cases. Even conservative estimates suggest daily exposure far exceeded modern safety limits. Harrison's analysis of mercury compounds is equally alarming. The amounts ordered in the 1590s could have caused severe neurological damage. By this measure, Elizabeth effectively conducted a decades-long experiment in self-administered toxic exposure. These findings gain added significance alongside recently discovered correspondence from John Dee, Elizabeth's personal astrologer and scientific advisor. Letters, found in private collections, reveal that as early as 1578, Dee warned the Queen about the dangers of her cosmetic practices. Elizabeth, however, dismissed his concerns and reportedly increased her use. The letters suggest she considered her appearance so crucial to political authority that she was willing to risk her health rather than appear in public without her elaborate makeup. Elizabeth's relentless drive to maintain her image becomes even more striking when viewed against the intense political pressures of her final years. Newly uncovered council minutes from the 1590s reveal that senior advisors were privately worried about her health and its impact on government stability. Sir Robert Cecil's private notes, found in family archives in 1996, describe increasingly desperate efforts to manage Elizabeth's public appearances as her condition worsened. Cecil detailed strategies such as shortening audiences, positioning the Queen to minimize visible tremors, and even deploying body doubles for distant appearances when her health made normal duties impossible. The use of body doubles is perhaps the most extraordinary part of this deception. Palace guard rosters analyzed by historian Dr. Patricia Reynolds reveal unusual security protocols seemingly designed to conceal, not protect. Guards were frequently rotated during public events, preventing anyone from observing the Queen too closely. Reynolds' research uncovered that at least 3 women served as occasional stand-ins, trained extensively to mimic Elizabeth's height, posture, mannerisms, and speech patterns. This system shows just how severe her condition had become. Ordinary public duties were no longer feasible. Court painters added another layer to the illusion. Official portraits from her final decade grew increasingly stylized, often bearing little resemblance to eyewitness descriptions. Artists clearly worked from idealized templates, not live sittings, crafting images that preserved the illusion of health and vitality. Nicholas Hilliard's workshop notes, discovered during 2001 restoration work, reveal techniques used to deceive: heavy lead-based paints for unnaturally smooth skin and clever positioning to mask deformities that makeup alone could no longer hide. The tragic irony, lead-based paints were being used to cover damage caused by lead-based cosmetics, a perfect metaphor for the self-destructive pursuit of political power through physical perfection. The most disturbing evidence comes from recently analysed medical records that survived archival purges. Dr. William Gilbert, Elizabeth's personal physician in her final years, left detailed notes discovered in a sealed wall cavity during renovations in 1998. His records provide the clearest contemporary medical account of her condition. Gilbert's notes align with modern understanding of chronic heavy metal poisoning, documenting symptoms that progressed from cosmetic concerns to systemic organ failure over decades. By 1600, Elizabeth required constant medical supervision. Gilbert detailed treatments aimed at counteracting what he called corruption of the blood, early attempts to address heavy metal toxicity. Perhaps most chilling is his documentation of Elizabeth's psychological state. She had become obsessively secretive about her health, refusing to let even trusted attendants see her without hours of preparation. She reportedly spent up to 6 hours each morning applying increasingly thick layers of cosmetics to hide her advancing damage. These rituals dictated the daily schedule of the court, with meetings delayed or cancelled whenever her condition made appearances impossible. The psychological toll was immense. Gilbert recorded periods of melancholic madness during which the Queen refused to speak or eat for days. Modern psychologists suggest she suffered from severe depression and anxiety linked to her appearance and the exhausting effort required to maintain it. Gilbert's final entries offer a heartbreaking glimpse of Elizabeth's last days. Isolated by her vanity, she struggled to maintain normal human contact. Death, he noted, appeared less a tragedy than a release from the exhausting performance her life had become. His records also clarify her speechlessness. This loss of vocal function was gradual, developing over months as toxins damaged her nervous system. Her gestural confirmation of James's heir may not have been a last-minute decision, but the only form of communication left to her after progressive neurological decline. Finally, Gilbert detailed the immediate aftermath of her death. Her body displayed what he termed unnatural preservation, with skin maintaining an artificial appearance hours after death. He attributed this to decades of chemical-laden cosmetics, creating a form of chemical embalming while she was still alive. This chemical saturation may explain some of the more bizarre reports of her post-mortem condition. If her body had absorbed lead and mercury compounds over decades, normal decomposition would have been dramatically altered, producing the unusual effects contemporary observers recorded. Gilbert's final observations offer perhaps the most fitting epilogue to Elizabeth's tragic story. In death, the Queen finally appeared at peace, freed from the unbearable physical and psychological burden of maintaining an image that had required ever more extreme measures to sustain. The evidence suggests that her passing didn't just mark the end of the Tudor dynasty, It closed a decades-long experiment at the deadly intersection of vanity, power, and toxic beauty rituals. Elizabeth's story is a stark warning about the cost of wielding authority to carefully curated illusions and the devastating personal toll of prioritizing appearance over health. What makes this tale resonate today is its illumination of a timeless tension, the conflict between public expectations and private reality that continues to shape the lives of powerful figures. Her experience with toxic cosmetics might feel like a relic of a bygone era, yet the pressures driving her extreme measures remain remarkably contemporary. Elizabeth's tale reminds us that even the most meticulously crafted images eventually crumble, and the pursuit of perfection through artificial means often exacts a far higher price than the perceived benefits. The Virgin Queen's ultimate secret may not be what ended her life, but what her death reveals about the impossibility of maintaining complete control over one's image and legacy. Perhaps the most revealing evidence comes from an unexpected source, the craftsman who built her coffin. Records in the Worshipful Company of Carpenters archives, discovered in 1987, show that her burial casket required extraordinary modifications, unlike any previous royal commission. The lead lining, specified at nearly twice the typical thickness for royal coffins, and master carpenter Thomas Whitmore's notes describe explicit instructions for an airtight casket with multiple sealed chambers and reinforced head protection. His personal journal entries, uncovered during later restorations, express amazement at these unusual specifications, suggesting the craftsman realized they were handling something beyond standard royal burial practices. Even more striking is the timing. Work on Elizabeth's specialized coffin began nearly 6 months before her death. Her condition must have been so visibly deteriorated that preparations were underway while she was still alive, a level of forethought unprecedented in royal funerary tradition. 4 centuries later, examining these fragments from archives in London, Madrid, and beyond, one truth is undeniable. Elizabeth I's greatest performance was not on the battlefield or in Parliament. It was the decades-long illusion she maintained about her own mortality. She transformed her physical decline into political theatre, so convincing that historians are still struggling to separate the Queen from the performance. The monarch who claimed she had the body of a weak, feeble woman, but the heart and stomach of a king, may have been speaking literally. Evidence indicates her body was betraying her, poisoned by the very image she fought to preserve. Yet her authority remained absolute to the very end, proving that sometimes the most powerful truths are the ones we choose never to reveal. What lies sealed within that lead-lined tomb in Westminster Abbey holds more than the remains of England's greatest monarch. It may hold the answer to whether vanity can literally kill and whether the price of sustaining absolute power through perfect appearance was ever worth it. Until those chambers are opened, Elizabeth's final secret rests exactly where she intended, buried with the Queen who understood that some mysteries are far more potent than any truth.